The headline of Rupert Darwall's piece at nationalreview.com today may be a bit out in the historical weeds because now I'm positive that nobody in Malaga, Washington or Murrieta, California has ever heard of Carthage or what historical reference that is. Here's a hint: 3rd century, fought Rome 3 times. They were called the Punic Wars. But he has a point, Mr. Darwall does, which is that if Republicans cease to be the party of Republican virtues, and the GOP pretty much has ceased to be the party of Republican virtues by embracing Donald Trump, then America can expect the same fate as ancient Rome's rival. And it wasn't pretty. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing is so powerful as a commonwealth in which laws are exactly observed, Montesquieu wrote in an extended passage contrasting the strength of Republican Rome, pre-Roman Empire, with the degeneracy of Carthage. Rome, of course, was the most successful republic of the ancient world, and Montesquieu, the most quoted Enlightenment philosopher during the creation of the American Republic. In Federalist 47, James Madison called Montesquieu an oracle, and in Federalist number 9, Alexander Hamilton referred to him as that great man, quoting at length his luminous abridgment of what Hamilton viewed as the best arguments that could be made in favor of the new Union. While the Founding Fathers strove, with Montesquieu as their teacher, to model their new country on what was best in the Roman Republic, today America is beginning to look more like Rome's plutocratic foe, Carthage. Carthage versus Rome was the struggle that decided the fate of the ancient world. Rome, according to Montesquieu, was governed by laws, and the people entrusted the Senate with the management of affairs. Carthage was governed by fraud. Is this starting to become a bit clearer? Carthaginians, who had become wealthier earlier than the Romans, were soon corrupted, and particular persons boasted the wealth of kings. The venality of Carthage saw great fortunes amassed by friends and relations of those in government, and in such cases, ultimately, universal ruin must ensue. Is this starting to sound like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? Ladies and gentlemen, it should, because it does. Carthage was split between 2 factions, one always for peace, the other always for war. In the absence of a monarchy, Montesquieu argued, feuds and divisions can be settled by the coercive power of the prince. But they are more lasting in a commonwealth because the evil of faction generally seizes the very power which only could have wrought a cure. Yet such was Rome's internal cohesion that even without a prince, war immediately united Rome's competing interests. Montesquieu wrote his reflections on the causes of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire in 1734, nearly a decade and a half before the Spirit of the Laws, his magnum opus on political theory, which historian Peter Gay called the most important book of the Enlightenment. But already in the earlier work, Montesquieu's preoccupation with the importance of constitutional design is evident. Quote, in the infancy of societies, the leading men in the Republic form the Constitution. Afterwards, the Constitution forms the leading men of the Republic, or at least it's supposed to. Montesquieu in Reflections also describes the separation of powers in the Roman Republic. Quote, the Roman laws had widely parceled out of the public power into several magistracies, which mutually supported as well as restrained and tempered each other, close quote. Powers were circumscribed, and Rome's equivalent of term limits meant that the people saw a succession of men wielding power, so they did not become habituated to any particular one. This description occurs in a section where Montesquieu records the substance of republican government dissolving when competitors for supreme power annihilated the authority of the magistrates and drew all the great affairs into the hands of one man and his little stubby fingers. Montesquieu, too, provides a profound insight that stands as a warning against an imperial executive power. After the death of the Roman Republic, Augustus, for that was the name offered by flattery to Octavius, was careful to establish order, or rather a durable servitude. For when once the sovereignty has been usurped in a free state, every transaction on which an unlimited authority can be founded is called a regulation. In all instances of disorder, commotion, and bad government are represented as the only expedients to preserve the just liberty of the subject. Close quote. Now, Julius Caesar, Octavius's adoptive father, had been assassinated because he could not hide his contempt for the Senate. It is starting to sound like Trump mania, ladies and gentlemen. Upholders of senatorial rights and prerogatives themselves likewise died grisly deaths. Unwilling to acknowledge Julius Caesar's rule, Cato the Younger committed suicide, botching it by splitting open his abdomen so that his viscera fell out. Cicero, who supported Octavius against Mark Antony, was hunted down by Mark Antony's soldiers when the two later allied, his head and his hand cut off and nailed to the rostra in the Forum. Sounds kind of like what John Hannity is implicitly threatening to do to never-Trumpers, or something of that nature. Violence for the sake of violence, as the late American dream Dusty Rhodes used to say. Augustus learned how to deal with the Senate. Watch out, Ted Cruz. He praised Cicero in death, after having had him killed in life, and retained the forms of the Republic every 10 years, expressing the desire to divest himself of his burden. These were little refinements of low cunning, Montesquieu comments. Every action of Augustus and each of his various regulations visibly tended to the establishment of monarchy. Today, America is split between a party of Carthage that supports identity politics and sees the spoils of politics as prizes to be distributed to favored groups and individuals, and the other party of Carthage that supports identity politics for their favored groups and sees the spoils of politics as prizes to be distributed to their favored groups and individuals. The American Republic's separation of powers is increasingly subverted. The constitutional requirement for the Senate's advice and consent on treaties was ignored when the executive rubber-stamped the Paris Climate Agreement. The executive branch bypassed Congress after it declined to pass cap-and-trade legislation, which is now to be accomplished by administrative fiat. Despite a Supreme Court stay, the chances of judicially overturning the Clean Power Plan to restore the balance of constitutional power hangs by the thread of the future composition of the Supreme Court, no matter who wins in November. Were the American Republic, which we're not a republic anymore, remember that, folks, were the American whatever, oligarchy, mob, to lose its remaining party, as it already has now officially, it would be in serious trouble, which means it is in serious trouble. Whatever their policy shortcomings, John McCain and Mitt Romney were, in their different ways, exemplars of Republican virtue, small r. But it wasn't enough. Rome became master of the ancient world because it didn't lose wars. If defeated in battle, it learned from its enemies how to win the war. Like the Romans, Americans are meant to win wars. 12 years on from the start of the Iraq War, Republican leaders still had no answer to what had gone wrong, so a plurality of Republican primary voters, aka the mob, decided to make America great again by supporting a candidate who does not even pay lip service to Republican small r virtues. After an earlier failed war, Richard Nixon warned Americans in his second inaugural address against retreating from the world, cautioning that doing so would invite new danger abroad. But he also warned that in order to maintain its strength, America would need to refrain from indiscriminate intervention abroad as well. It is important that we understand both the necessity and the limitations of America's role in maintaining that peace, Nixon said. Rejecting JFK's promise to bear any burden, Nixon declared that the time had passed when America would make every other nation's conflict its own. Just as America's role is indispensable in preserving the world's peace, so is each nation's role indispensable in preserving its own peace. Okay, it wasn't the best crafted passage, but the point was made. A republic whose domestic tranquility had been torn apart by a divisive war had to find new ways of projecting its power and maintaining its position in the world. Nixon's radical diplomacy aimed to break out of the Cold War by bringing about a multipolar international system, much as had existed in Europe after the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon wasn't much impressed at the way Castlereagh, the British Foreign Secretary, used victory to forge peace. Castlereagh had the continent at his mercy, and he made peace as if he'd been defeated. The imbecile! Apparently that's a direct Napoleon quote. Castlereagh wanted to win the peace, however, and the next 99 years saw a degree of peace that Europe had not seen in the previous century, and did not see in the first half of the next. Barack Obama's foreign policy failed because it presumes American weakness. Hell, it revels in it. And America reduced to the level of the rest of the world. No one was at his mercy when he attempted to make the peace. In a world in which great powers annex the territory of other states and stake illegal claims to vast areas of the sea, only American strength, intelligently applied, can bring about a stable multipolar system. And whatever the outcome in 2 months' time, more than ever now, it's of paramount importance that Republicans honor their duty to be the party of the Republic. As Carthage shows, however, political dissoluteness at home brings defeat abroad. As Rome shows, the untrammeled power of an imperial executive destroys the source of the republic's and thus America's strength. And in the person of Donald Trump, Republican voters have selected both Rome and Carthage. And it's very, very tragic that we're going to have to find out, that we even might find out, just how hideous a fate is in store.